Hey guys, Spud here, as always. As you guys all know, the missions we run on the Spuds Discord server can be pretty intense, and are built to be as realistic as possible. And while that is why you guys love watching our mission videos on YouTube, it can be pretty demanding skills and knowledge-wise on the DCS pilots who participate. This also means that it can be rather intimidating for new players to hop on and start flying in missions. And after talking to many of these new pilots who have wanted to join a mission, it's not the Pew-Pew stuff that people worry about when trying to join. It's everything except the Pew-Pew stuff. It's airmanship skills. Everything about flying an airplane in DCS World or in real life outside of firing missiles, dropping bombs, and shooting the gun. Everything from radio usage, talking on the radio and interacting with ATC, to following taxi instructions, to maintaining a specific altitude and a steady airspeed, or following vectors to an ILS approach, and much, much more. A lot of players come to DCS World through a pipeline that looks something a little like this. They play Ace Combat, and that sparks an interest in fighter jets and military aviation. They then move on to War Thunder, and then they finally want to graduate to the pinnacle of the fighter jet experience, DCS World. And unfortunately, in no step in this process are the basic airmanship skills required to integrate into a large coordinated mission in the most realistic flight sim available, ever emphasized or even introduced. That's why this last weekend we decided to head back to basics and help train folks who feel they are right on the cusp of taking the plunge into flying a Sunday mission, and help tune up their airmanship skills to help them feel more confident in their ability to participate in and enhance everyone else's experience in the mission. Our fictional exercise here is called Exercise Black Star, which is the Royal Daimar Air Force equivalent of Red Flag. For some non-sim admin items, so things that you're going to need to take care of before you actually, load into your cockpit, we've got our server name here, the IP address of the server. The password for today is going to be Romeo Delta Alpha Foxtrot, so RDAF. The SRS IP, if AutoConnect is not working for you and you need to do a manual connection, just keep in mind that the port is a little bit different from what SRS usually uses. It's 15002. We've got a lot ATC server, and the coalition password is blue. Not going to be using any mods today. So if you have the mod, the harm mod for the F4 still, no problem. We just won't be using it today. We'll hopefully get the mission rolling right around 0900 Pacific time. If we need to kind of move that to the right a little bit, that's no problem. I'd rather get through kind of the more academic stuff for all of you guys today than worry too much about the actual flying. Because if we can study on the ground hard, then we can make the flying part easy and smooth. One of the things that I always tell students that I'm teaching to fly in real life, whatever kind of flying that is, the harder you study on the ground and the more you know on the ground, the easier it's going to be once you get up into the air and start actually flying. So we're going to apply that to DCS World here. For kind of some action items to do before you get into a server or a mission is we're going to want to have your flight call sign. So the example here is the flight is SHA-1 and I'm the -3 in that flight. And then put a little like a slash or a backslash, whatever you want to do, and then throw in your name in there. And then if you're off of a carrier in our missions, usually you throw in your modex in there as well, just to help out the controllers a little bit, keep track of people, regardless of whether they're in lot ATC or in spectator mode in DCS. This is going to be a bit different for today, but typically for a briefing, we do a 5 to 10 minute briefing that covers all the admin and strike package stuff, and then we break off into a flight brief. We'll probably do a little bit of a flight brief today, but we'll kind of figure that out along the way. For our mission learning objectives today, it's going to be all about airmanship, radio communications, things of that nature. We're going to practice some air-to-air refueling, and we're definitely going to practice some unguided munitions delivery today. And that will it's going to be a big one because a lot of folks, I think, have don't quite understand what tactics to use when delivering unguided bombs. And so we get a lot of folks get shot down by AAA or by SAMs when trying to drop, say, Mark 82s, Mark 83s, or any other slick type of bombs. So we're going to work on that today for sure. Next thing here, I'm sure you guys all read this, just kind of a little like lore piece to our exercise today. We'll skip over that today for the interest of time. Weather for today is going to be really nice weather. We're going to be stepping to our jets at 06:45 local time. So the METAR, the most recent METAR, is going to be at Vermont David at 05:53 local time. Wind is 330 at 5 knots, so right down the pipe for runway 33. That'll be our active runway for today. 10 statute miles visibility with scattered clouds at 7,000 feet. Temperature is 20 degrees Celsius, and altimeter is 3,000 for today. Basically, for our learning objectives, for our airmanship skills, we're just going to be working on communications training within your flight with ATC and with the AIC as well. We're also going to work on mission timeline adherence skills, so training to utilize a timeline for mission flow to ensure all mission critical components are on station on time. So that way we don't have situation missions where, say, the strike flights get in front of SEED or get in front of fighter sweep, things of that nature. Unguided munitions delivery skills, utilizing a proper roll-in maneuver to avoid ground fire and shore adds. And then, of course, air-to-air refueling. We're going to really try and get a good, proper tanker intercept and join up, and formation on the tanker for observation left and reform right, and receiving fuel from the tanker with whether you're a boom and receptacle or a probe and drogue jet. The air-to-air refueling will be the last thing we do, so that way everybody can get through all the other skills. And that way, if somebody has a failure with actually getting some fuel, no problem, you're not going to miss dropping bombs, things like that. Bullseye for today is going to be the H4 pumping station, and that's going to be very close to our target area for today. So in case anyone has any issues near the target area, that's going to be a very good diver field. Just keep in mind that that is a rather short runway there. ROE. Flight into the Empire of Piran is strictly prohibited for today. A hard deck of 1,500 feet AGL and speed restriction of Mach 0.9 over populated areas for today, and a hard deck of 5,000 feet AGL over the target area. If you find that you're going to be dropping your bombs below 5,000 feet AGL, go ahead and pull up and come around and try again, so that way we're not dropping our bombs too low. For IFF for today, in case we have any of our sneaky aggressor pilots decide to come out and bounce us, two-factor IFF is required. Electronic plus one of the following: Outlaw, which is of course a aircraft taking off from a known enemy airfield. A TGP or visual capture using your Mark 1 eyeball, your TCS camera, or a targeting pod. Or the AIC declaration of a hostile aircraft.
Hey, Spud, real quick question from Red Crown. What airfields would count as outlaw in this case?
It's going to be King Hussein Air College is where our aggressor squadrons are based.
Roger, thanks.
If there's a furball, we have aircraft merged together. That's going to be visual confirmation only, so that way we don't accidentally shoot a friend who is in a furball. And also make sure that something to kind of think about if you've got AMRAMs on your aircraft is we don't want to just be firing an AMRAM into a dogfight, because an AMRAM may accidentally lock onto a friendly. Ray gun calls are not valid due to the RWR limitations of our F4E Phantom II pilots. So just keep that in mind. Moving on here, we've got a flight plan overview for today's flight. We have kind of like a figure 8 or infinity sign kind of shaped flight plan for today. We're going to be taking off as single ships and flying out towards waypoint 1, where we'll be entering into a left-hand wagon wheel at an assigned altitude by ATC, and then our flights will rejoin at that assigned altitude in that left-hand orbit at waypoint 1. And that we're doing that today to kind of mimic a little bit for our Marine Corps pilots, a way to kind of simulate some carrier ops a little bit, because obviously on an aircraft carrier, we don't always have the luxury of forming up and taxiing and taking off as a flight. We just get launched off the deck at whatever order that we get to the catapult at, or that the flight directors bring us to the catapult. And that way you guys will have some experience with forming up with your flight in air. We'll then push from there as a flight to the strike marshal point, where the strike will come together and start to marshal at, again, another ATC assigned altitude. And then, according to the timeline, we'll then push towards the target area. We'll hit the IP, we'll drop our bombs with 2 passes max, and then we'll come out to the egress point, and we'll fly back up north to the tanker stack. We'll practice getting some fuel, and then we'll come down to the airfield. We've got a runway lineup point that can be a good place to kind of think about being your initial point for an overhead pattern entry. And then, of course, we'll land and taxi back into our parking stands. For kind of usually we break the mission briefings down into more of a kind of by flight basis, but for today and for the sake of learning, we're going to be breaking things down into a mission phase kind of briefing here, going over all those skills we want to cover today. Upon startup, pilots are going to act as a single ship, and then will request taxi and takeoff by themselves. You're going to take off at whatever order that you get to the runway and are cleared for takeoff, and you're going to head to that flight marshal point at your assigned altitude to wait for the rest of your flight. Like I said, this will mimic some carrier ops, and it's going to allow everybody a chance to call for taxi and takeoff clearances. So we have a airport diagram here ready to rock and roll for us in our knee boards in the mission. So that way, when a ground controller gives us our taxi clearances, we can follow those correctly and make sure we get to the correct runway using the correct taxiways from our parking stands. So let's see here. From everybody around here, let's take a look. Let's take a look at who's here. Who can we pick on first? Okay, let's pick on Jen. So Jen, how would we call up on the radio to request taxi instructions from a ground controller?
Man, you're asking me. I'm a tactical guy. I don't know this. Let's see here. As a flight, what you can do, let's see here. Hold on. I had notes for this. I don't remember where I put them, so I'm just gonna bullshit this now. So obviously the basic radio etiquette of who you are, where you are. I'm sorry. The person you're talking to, who you are, where you are, and what do you want. So I don't know. I can't really see the thing here, so let me just pull it up on my end so I can actually read the taxi chart. So say, I don't know, you're Hornet 1-1 and you're at, let's see here, Hangar 3 near Delta. You'd say something like remote ground, Hornet 1, see maybe 4-ship FA-18C at the Hangar 3 or whatever, request taxi to the active. And you can also add any additional information, like maybe we're minus a plane or we have the weather already. You can do something like that. But I'm just going to preface this by saying this is how I do it Civvy side. I don't know if there's anything specific that I need to do military side, because I don't do that very often.
It's all basically the same. So really good job. For everybody, guys, I know it can be very nerve-wracking to talk on the radios, both in real life and in DCS. And I think that's the biggest kind of barrier for people joining missions is talking on the radios, right? Basically, every radio communication can be broken down into a really simple formula, just like Jen said. Who I'm talking to, who I am, where I am, and what I want is basically the basis of all radio communications. So, yeah, exactly. So let's say we're in parking stand 37. So we'd call up Ramat David ground. This is Hornet 11, parking stand 37, ready for taxi. And then the ground controller is going to come back and say, Roger, Hornet 11, Ramat David ground. You're cleared to taxi runway 33 via Foxtrot Echo. And you can kind of follow along the taxi diagram there. Going to taxi along via Foxtrot and then Echo all the way down to the end of runway 33. Now, what's really important here is once we receive a instruction or a clearance from ATC, is for us as a pilot, we need to read back that instruction. That's really important. So I would then say, once I've gotten that clearance, I would then say, Roger, Ramat David ground, Hornet 11 is taxiing to runway 33 via Foxtrot Echo. So this is something that, most DCS World pilots do a really good job of asking ATC for things and then listening to what ATC tells them to do. What we kind of tend to fail at in DCS is the readback. The readback is just as important as, asking for that clearance, because that allows you as the pilot and the ATC controller to ensure that you're on the same page. Because what if you, in your jet, misheard it, or, somebody stepped on you partially through the clearance and you didn't realize it, or something of that nature. So that way it gives you guys a chance to make sure that you're on the same page. And if you're not, then you can correct it. And I hear a lot of DCS World pilots almost getting kind of like angry at the ATC controllers in missions sometimes for kind of like being like, hey man, give me the readback, or, hey man, I need that readback, or hey man, I need to hear you say runway 33 after the Foxtrot Echo. It's really, really important. And in DCS, we tend to have controllers who are afraid of the pilots, rather than the other way around in real life, which is pilots who are afraid of controllers. Because in DCS, a controller can't really give you a phone number. But we want to make sure that we're always just, giving our ATC guys the utmost respect for being the guys who volunteered to do that job, rather than be in the cockpit flying around with us, okay? So really need to make sure we work really hard on those readbacks today, and that's kind of going to be our emphasis item while we're here on the airfield. So we'll move on to, I guess we got to keep going here. Once we have taxied down, we've taxied from parking stand 37 here. We've taxied via Foxtrot around Echo, and we're holding short of runway 33. Let's see, who can we pick on now?
I'm here. All right.
That's all good. We'll pick on Rack this time. Rack, we're holding short of runway 33. What are we going to do? How are we going to ask for takeoff clearance?
Geez, I just woke up. Ramat David Tower, Gunman 11 holding short, runway 23, request takeoff.
Roger, Gunman 23. Say again, your runway you're holding short of? So we're holding short of runway 33 here, not 23.
33. Sorry.
All good.
Again, just woke up.
Yeah, no problem. So exactly. So basically, it's going to be the same formula that we just talked about. So it's going to be, Hornet 11, Ramat David Tower, Hornet 11, holding short, runway 33, ready for takeoff. And then, okay, so what are the three clearances that a ATC controller can come back with and give you as you're holding short of that runway from Fallen here?
Either they'll ask you to just hold, line up and wait, or clear to take off.
Gotcha. Explain what those three different clearances mean.
If it tells you to hold, that means it's probably traffic coming in and landing. So you just got to stay there. If
Right.
it gives you line up or wait, maybe somebody just landed or just took off and just trying to get that spacing. So just give time for the traffic to get out of the way. And clear to takeoff is as I say, just clear.
Roger. Cool. Great job. Okay, so why would an ATC controller give you a lineup and wait clearance?
Most of the times it's because somebody just landed and still on the runway, or somebody just took off and they just want that spacing to clear like wake turbulence and stuff like that if it's a bigger aircraft.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes utilizing that runway a little bit more efficient. So that way, if we have somebody rolling out after landing and they're exiting the runway, we can have that next flight of jets or that next individual jet lined up on the runway and ready to go as soon as that other jet clears the runway or the wake turbulence has dissipated, things of that nature. So that way we can just get jets on and off that runway as quickly as possible. If you're cleared for takeoff, whether you as an individual or as a flight, you've got the whole runway to yourself at your leisure, line up on the runway, and take off. If you're told to hold short, you're just going to hold short exactly where you are, so that way you don't make a runway incursion into that runway. Great job. Okay, so once we're up in the air, we're then going to switch over to our departure controller, which I don't know if we have ATC for that today.
I don't think we do.
Okay. The tower will give us a altitude to climb to for that particular flight, and that way you'll have an altitude to be at, so that way you can marshal with your flight. Let's talk about changing frequencies as a flight of aircraft. So that's something that's going to been a little bit of a challenge for us recently in making sure that everybody is getting onto the correct frequency. So let's pick on... how about Frozone? How would you, if you're leading a flight of aircraft, how would you have your whole flight change to a different frequency?
Okay, well, first thing I would call out, let's say we just took off, I would say something like Ramat David Tower, let's see, what flight was I this where? Let's just say Shooter 11. Clear your airspace, switching, or I'd say something like clear your airspace.
Gotcha. So that's definitely valid. I was looking for something a little bit different, but no worries there. So if you feel like a controller has forgotten about you and you need to say change frequencies, yeah, just call them up. Be like, hey, Ramat David Tower, Shooter 1 flight, we'd like to change frequencies or like a frequency change. And then, Ramat David Towers, you'd be like, oh, yeah, sorry about that, man. Cleared to change frequencies.
Oh, you're looking for, that type of frequency change. I get you. I get you. So if I were doing something like that, I would say something like Ramat David Tower, Shooter 11 flight, looking to switch frequencies.
Yep, exactly. And then once you have your new frequency to go to, you just say to your flight within your intra-flight frequency, Shooter 1 flight, let's go ahead and push, button 3 or button 4 or button 5 if we have preset frequencies. Or if you don't have a preset frequency, you can go ahead and tell them to say, hey, switch to 123.45 or something. Then once you're on that new frequency, don't worry about, trying to, not step on other people you do want to worry about not stepping on people on that new frequency. But we want to ensure that we have everybody on the correct frequency. So on that new frequency, if you're the leader of Shooter 1 flight, you're going to want to say, Shooter 1 flight check-in on that new frequency. So that way your wingmen if they're on the correct frequency, they're going to hear their leader on that new frequency. And then for that check-in, you're going to have your wingmen are going to say in sequence 2, 3, 4. So that way you then hear back your wingmen on that correct frequency. And that way that's a check for both you and your wingmen to know that everybody's on the same page, everybody's on the correct frequency. Does that make sense, guys? If you listen to a lot of radio traffic out there, whether that's civilians just flying in formation for fun or military guys in formations, when you do that radio...
Is it just me or is he breaking up?
Yeah, I was
Okay.
Fix it.
Make sure your push to talk is not whacking out.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Talking about the chat.
Where did I cut off there, guys?
We stopped at 2, 3, 4, and then flight lead knows everyone's there. Oh,
yeah, it was the push.
As well.
Cool.
That's helpful for your controller because in the case that you need to split between frequencies, I need to know who's there and who isn't.
Yep, exactly. And that way everybody's on the same page. I hope you guys are picking up on the theme here that radio communications are all about ensuring everybody's on the same page together. Cool. So we're going to take off. We're going to switch frequencies as required. We're probably going to be pushed from the tower frequency right to tactical for today. Then we're going to be assigned an altitude. We're going to climb to that altitude, and then we're going to start. Whoever gets there first is going to start that left-hand wagon wheel at their assigned altitude. And then as the rest of their flight takes off and joins them, you're just going to form up in that formation. Once you've got your whole flight there, plus your instructor, you're then, or if you don't have an instructor, just your whole flight, you're then going to push from flight marshal over to waypoint 2, which is going to be the strike marshal. So we'll move on to the next slide here. And this is going to be
Spot, you want to go over the check-in procedure with the agency?
I was just going to ask that.
Yeah, sure. So let's talk about checking in with our AIC or your Taxi 2. So in some missions, you have a Taxi 2. The Taxi 2 guy is going to be essentially your overall mission commander, who's going to be kind of in charge of pushing people in the right directions to essentially, accomplish the mission or the mission objective that's stated on the ATO or air tasking order. Sometimes we don't have a Taxi 2 because, DCS limitations and, we have, we're gamers, right? We're not professionals. In which case we may only have an AIC. And the AIC may be kind of doing both jobs a little bit. But basically, when we get switched over to the tactical frequency, or in this case, usually we call it the strike frequency, the AIC and or the Taxi 2 needs to know, are all of his players, players in terms of game, but also in real life, they call the pilots and the aircraft in the mission players. He needs to know that all of his players in his mission are set and ready to go, or if there's any issues with his players that he has to work with for conducting the mission. So for check-in with your strike frequency with the Taxi 2 or the AIC, you're going to provide a check-in with them, which is basically going to tell them who you are, where you are, essentially a quick little rundown of basically the state of your flight. So let's pick on somebody else here. Let's go with...
Spud, do you mind if I speak to this for a quick second?
Stand by 1 second. So how about Bumble? We haven't picked on him yet. Bumble, how are you going to check in with an AIC or Taxi 2?
All right. I've got my flight. Let's assume I've switched into their frequency. I've got my flight up on the new Freq. And I'll call into Red Crown / Snoopy / whoever it is, agency, Spectre 6-1 and flight, checking in, probably give them an alpha or position if possible, altitude, and any well, if we're as fragged, then we're as fragged. I'll report any deficiencies or alterations to the flight if necessary.
Gotcha. Cool. Pretty good job. Jen, go for it.
Just a slight modification of that. So obviously when you first get on the net, do your sniper check 1, 2, 3, 4, all that stuff. Just to make sure everyone's on the net first. And second thing would just be let's say the controlling agency is Saber, sniper, check-in. Just so he knows you're there, but in case he's doing something else, I could be talking with ATC to coordinate another handoff, or I could be talking to Red Crown because someone is currently in a merge right now and they need help. So just probe him, but don't send just don't send the paragraph as soon as you get there, because there's a lot of times where like I could be busy with something else and miss it, and then you have to repeat it all again, and that's not fun.
That's a good plan. Actually, that's a good plan. I like that.
So then, like, the controller would come back, like, I don't know, sniper check-in. Then you would give like the essentially like who you are, where you are, all that stuff. But one thing you can also do, just to make sure that you have stable and reliable communications between your controller, is instead of telling him your alpha check, you can request it instead and then validate it after he comes back with it, because that establishes that two-way communication that's longer than like 5 seconds. Because at least IRL radios have a tendency to like fall off after a few seconds if they're broken. And you always have to plan. Well, I'm not sure if SRS models that, but that can be a factor. So it's really
so
just
what's the actual brevity you're looking for? What's the actual brevity you're looking for?
I'd have to, you know what, Spud, can I pick on you for a moment? Just
like, so let's
pretend you're a fighter and I'll be the controller.
I can do it if you want.
I'll jump in here. So it's going to be Spectre 6 flight checking in, flight of 4 F4s.
Let's see, Spectre 6, Saber, Alpha check, bullseye, 1, 2, 3 for 45. Any alibis?
Spectre 6 alpha checks, good, and no alibis.
You see how that establishes that two-way communication that's like more than 3 seconds?
Yeah.
So we've essentially validated where we are, who we're like our position, our our mission, all that stuff is validated, while we also have ensured that our radios are reliable enough to, communicate for more than 3 seconds.
And this might be getting into the weeds a little, too deep for our new guys. So new guys, please just, keep an open mind. I know it's a fire hose of information, and just pick out those little tidbits that you possibly can as we move through the training today. Because this is going to be a training that's going to cover everything for everybody, basically. So don't be intimidated, please. And then an alibi is going to be essentially like an issue with your aircraft. Or an issue with a member of your flight, or maybe your airfield did not have the stock of JDAMs to give you, and so instead you've got slick bombs that you're going to drop unguided. It's some sort of issue with your flight that was not specified on the ATO. If you're flying an F-14, maybe somebody burned out their radar on the ground. Things of that nature. So it's just going to be essentially issues with your aircraft. So moving on from the radio communications there for a little bit, when we hit the strike Marshall Point, we only have one waypoint here, and we want to ideally fly a holding pattern in order to conserve as much fuel as possible. Now, if we are flying in just a simple circle wagon wheel holding pattern, why is that going to expend more gas than a actual like oval shaped holding pattern? From anybody who wants to answer.
Because you're pulling up, you're adding more drag to your aircraft overall, because you have to be slightly pulled up on the stick and trim it out. So yeah, just more drag basically.
Yeah, exactly. So if we are banked and we're turning, we're going to have to increase our angle of attack in order to maintain our altitude, which means more induced drag as a result of that increased lift requirement, which means we're going to have to push our throttle up to maintain our airspeed. So thus we're going to use more gas. So if we fly a nice circle holding pattern like this, and we have nice straight, 30 nautical mile-ish legs to it, where we can get our wings back to level and we can pull back on that throttle a little bit, we're going to save a heck of a lot of gas. So because we have one waypoint here, rather than flying, say, between two waypoints, we're going to utilize a kind of more standard holding pattern diagram today, where when you fly to waypoint 2 here, you're going to hit waypoint 2, and then you and your flight, along with your instructor, if you have one in your flight, is going to make a left-hand turn around to 270 degrees for the outbound leg. You're then going to fly on that 270 degree heading until you see you're 30 nautical miles from waypoint 2. Then you're going to make a left-hand turn again, and hopefully you're going to be on a 090 degree inbound heading. You're going to fly that 090 degree inbound until you hit the waypoint, and then you're going to keep on going. And you're going to keep on going, keep on going, keep on going until we hit the point in the timeline where your flight is scheduled to push from the Marshall point to the target point. Or, if the case may be, which I kind of suspect will be today, if that timeline gets changed, then you may be told to push by the AIC, or you may have a new time at which you're going to push. And then when you and your flight start to push, I always like to give the AIC or the Taxi 2 a little reminder, be like, hey, Spectre 6-1's pushing to target, or Spectre 6-1's pushing. Something of that nature, if I haven't been given an actual order to push. I'm just pushing at my time. Things of that nature. Are we good here on this slide, or does anyone have any questions, concerns, issues, anything like that?
Real quick from Red Crown. I will also do a roll call at vol -2. I might roll X that. So roll X is just, I'm going to be adding time to all of the vols.
The master time plan, essentially.
Yes, the master time plan. And that check-in will be something like all stations, Red Crown, prep for roll call, starting with Hydra 1. And then, Hydra 1 will be like Hydra 1 or Red Crown Hydra 1 checking in, no alibis. And then whoever's 2, 3, 4, all the way down the list. If there's someone that we need to skip, I'll say skip it. And once we get to whoever's 8, Mako 8, I think, then I'll be ready to push Fang 3 and Flame 4. Or Flume 4.
Perfect. Love it.
But one quick question for the flight marshal and rejoin after the target. Are we going to roll with the same holding pattern or just standard wagon wheel?
You mean after we hit the target? Or
yes, for rejoining at the flight marshal and after hitting the target, are we going to rejoin in that same holding pattern, the 30 by 30?
No. So basically, after we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here. But after we hit the target, we drop our bombs. The flights are just going to fly back to the tanker stack waypoint and then be assigned a tanker to hit and get some juice from. So the holding point only applies to pre-strike stuff.
Okay.
That makes sense?
Does that include flight marshal, though?
I think we said wagon wheel for flight marshal.
Yeah, flight marshal is just going to be a nice little circle.
Got it.
And that's just, we're trying to mimic carrier ops a little bit here for the flight marshal. And then we're going to be a little bit more intense on the strike marshal here. We're just going to be walking people up through the difficulty today.
Got it.
Yep. And this is where go for it.
Just a quick one. Oh, when you go and you put your bombs on target, you do 2 passes. Do you go back to the strike marshal, or do you go to the ingress point? Or
we're getting ahead of ourselves here, so let's continue on. For our unguided munitions delivery today, we're going to be utilizing a proper roll-in maneuver from a high enough altitude in order to get our bombs off of our aircraft as high as possible above our target area. And the reason for this is we're seeing a lot of pilots who are dropping dumb bombs, particularly in our more Cold War or 80s focused missions, that are getting so low to the ground and having such flat dives onto their target that they're just getting sieved by AAA all the time, or they're taking a SAM or something of that nature. So in order to avoid this, I really want to teach you guys and really want to emphasize a proper good roll-in maneuver that will allow you to have a nice steep dive onto your target to allow you to get those bombs off of your aircraft from as high of an altitude as possible. Keep in mind that the lower you get, the more AAA batteries can shoot at you, right? If you're at 20,000 feet, only the highest caliber AAA can get to you. But as you get lower, you're going to get into, from going from 100 millimeter to 57 millimeter to 30 millimeter, 20 millimeter, all the way down to a guy with a rifle on the ground if you get all the way down to, say, 1,000 feet above the deck. So it's very, very important to stay as high as possible because, here, let's pick on somebody else here. How about somebody new? Lawn Boy, what is the most dangerous thing for a fighter aircraft in combat?
Oh, that's a good one. I could list like 1,000 things right now.
The most dangerous thing that you think shoots down the most number of fighter jets.
I don't know. It's like essentially enemy incoming fire, right? And
yeah,
it should be. Should be aware of that.
Anybody got any more specific of an answer?
AAA.
I was going to say the pilot.
Triple
I
A.
was gonna say AAA and ground fire, and usually shoulder launch SAMs.
Yeah,
so you can't see them.
Yeah,
IR guided.
Your own
Anything
bomb.
IR guided as well.
AAA is the answer statistically. Is the worst killer of fighter jets out there. For the most part, if we can see a SAM launch as a pilot and we give a very good evasive maneuver, we can avoid that SAM 95% of the time, right? But we can't see AAA, and especially if they're AAAs and kind of firing up in a barrage where we just have to fly through it, that golden BB is always going to hit us. So if we can get our bombs off of our aircraft from a high enough altitude, that's going to be ideal.
Spud, do you want us to use a CCIP drop, not CCRP, or does it matter?
We're going to use CCIP today. And of course, for us in our old F4s, we're going to be using dive toss. But so before we get to my kind of showing you guys a demo of a roll-in maneuver, just to kind of give you guys something to copy, let's talk about fence checks. So we always hear guys, say in videos, whether real life videos or DCS videos, everybody kind of gets an idea of what a fence check is. But a lot of people don't really remember what the actual acronym of fence stands for. And the acronym can help you flow through your cockpit and ensure that your jet is fully set up and ready to go for combat. So as a flight lead, let's say you're pushing from the Marshall Stack and you're heading inbound into Indian country. At some point, you're going to want to tell your flight to fence in. Now, what you want your pilots to be doing and yourself to be doing is checking and setting up your aircraft for combat. And fence is a great acronym to help you remember that. You want to check your fuel. Do we have enough fuel to fight? Or, oops, I just discovered I have a fuel leak. I don't have enough fuel to fight anymore. Or, we want to check our emitters. So that's going to be your radar, or in the case of, say, our Strike Eagle pilots, radars, plus your air-to-air TACAN if you want to do a yardstick with your flight. Navigation, make sure you have the correct INS waypoint set to bring you to the right spot to go do the fight. Or you have your transmit-receive TACAN set to the correct TACAN station to get you to the right place, or however you're going to navigate into the target area. C, for countermeasures, make sure that your chaff and flares are set and ready to go. They're not stuck on standby, or they're not set up in any way, shape, or form. E, for ECM, have your ECM set to either standby or receive based off of your aircraft type. So that way you can flip that jammer on as quickly as possible and hopefully jam a SAM coming up at you. And E, again, for employment, master arm set to arm. You're also going to want to make sure that you have your external lights doused as well. So that way the DCS AI won't be able to see you as easily, as well as, of course, in real life, you don't want to have your external lights on while you're in combat. This is kind of where we get into, the idea of teamwork and team play. If you call your flight to fence in and the -3 forgets to douse his external lights, that's where working as a team, we just want to say, hey, 3, make sure you get your lights off. Things of that nature. So that way we're all taking care of each other as we're flying into the target area. So let's see, who can we pick on here? Let's go with, how about Scuba Steve? Scuba Steve, how are we going to call for our flight to fence in on the radio? And how are those members of our flight going to come back to us and tell us that they're fenced in?
Thinking that would be Hydra 1-1 flight fence in.
Cool.
And then they would reply back 2, 3, 4, etc.
Cool. Super close. So, if your Dash 2 has just fenced in and they're going to tell you they're fenced, they're going to say, 2's fenced or 2's fenced in, something like that. And then if we're a wingman, we want to give our fuel state to our leader. So that way our leader can always be thinking about, okay, do my wingmen have enough gas? And if they don't, do I need to send them back home or do I need to send them
out?
Oh, sorry. If we are a wingman and we've just fenced in, we need to ensure that we give also our fuel state to our flight lead. So that way our flight lead can ensure that he has an idea of what the fuel state of his flight is before getting into combat. So that way he can either say, oh no, 2, you need to abort and head back to the tanker, or, divert to our divert field, things of that nature. So that way everybody, again, going back to that kind of idea of everyone being on the same page, everybody is on the same page as to how much fuel you have available for the fight in that flight. Does that make sense? Awesome.
Yep.
Bueller. Awesome. So cool. So that wingman's going to come back and be like, 2's fenced in, state 9.8, or whatever it might be. So that way, just give that fuel state back to the leader. So I'm going to hop into DCS, into a cockpit real quick here, and give you guys a quick demo on what our targets are going to look like today, as well as what a roll-in maneuver is going to look like. I'm going to be flying an F4 for this demo, but keep in mind that everything I do here is going to apply to all of our aircraft across the board, regardless of whether you're flying a Hornet or a Viper or a Mirage or whatever it is. The basics here are going to apply across the board. So let me just kind of get things set up and ready to rock and roll.
Fun.
Yeah.
Just if we're flying the Phantom where you can't see how much fuel you have in the external tanks, do you just want us to give you the internal or internal fuel state when we check it or when we fence in?
That is something that I've been debating kind of internally with myself. And I'm not quite sure, but I guess the best way to do it would be like, give your internal fuel state and then also let your leader know if the externals are dry or if they're still wet. Would probably
That's how
be.
we do.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
Yeah, that's how, at least
in
as far as I'm aware,
French
that's
Air
how it was
Force,
done.
that's how they do.
Yeah. Perfect.
Two leader tanks empty.
Perfect. Okay. So we get the autopilot thrown on here, and then we'll do some talking, and I'll set up the cockpit for dropping some bombs. Meant to have this set up before starting the mission briefing, but oh well.
Man, I want to have one of these in real life.
Me too. Cool. So, let me set the bombing computer here.
Only 30 minutes.
That's pretty cool. Copy.
Welcome. Okay. So basically what we've got here is we have a target out in front of us. And there's a few reasons why we want to execute a proper roll-in maneuver when dropping unguided munitions onto a target. And almost all of these reasons are going to keep us safer as the pilot dropping those weapons, as well as make it more accurate when we drop those weapons on target, regardless of whether we're flying an antiquated F4 or we're flying a whiz-bang Viper in DCS, okay? Number one thing is we don't want to fly directly at our target. We want to fly an offset to either the left-hand or the right-hand side of the target itself. The reason is we have this big old instrument panel in front of us here. So if the target gets underneath our nose, we can't see it, right? And we can't hit what we can't see, of course, just like any other kind of situation. Also, if we're trying to drop bombs on a target, it's probably a good bet that the people we're dropping bombs on want to kill us back, right? So they may be firing AAA at us, they may be firing SAMs at us. So if we can't see that target area because it's behind our instrument panel, then we're not going to see that incoming SAM. And like we said earlier, if you can see the SAM launch, you can evade it, right? So we want to fly offset to the side away from our target. So let's zoom in and see if we can see it. All of our targets today are going to be marked by some smoke to make things a little bit easier to see. So there's our target out over there. So we're not flying directly at it, which is good. You want to be able to see it. If you have track IR or VR, you can of course shift your shoulders a little bit over to the side to keep that target in sight. And then as we get closer to it, when flying that offset, we want to try and bring that target right up against the canopy rail of our jet. Now, of course, the height of that canopy rail is going to be different for different aircraft, but it's close enough for, horseshoes and hand grenades that basically you just want to put that target right up against your canopy rail here. And then we're going to wait. We're going to be patient, and we're going to wait for that target to touch our canopy bow, and at which point we're going to start that roll-in maneuver. Now, a good roll-in maneuver is going to allow us to pull nothing but positive Gs rather than pushing the nose forward and pushing negative Gs. So that's going to be better for our bodies because we're better at taking positive Gs. Our jet is going to be better at taking positive Gs. And if we're always pulling back on the stick, if we were to inadvertently drop a weapon, we're going to be pulling the jet away from that weapon rather than accidentally pushing the nose forward and hitting our own bomb on the way down the chute. And in keeping the target nice and close to our canopy bow, but still visible, or canopy rail, but still visible, and then rolling in when we hit that canopy bow, for almost all aircraft in DCS, if you start that roll-in maneuver at that point, it's going to give you a roughly 35 to 45 degree dive angle. And we're looking for that nice deep dive angle, so that way we can get our sight onto the target quickly from as high of an altitude as possible, get those weapons off of the aircraft, and then pull off the target as quickly as possible. So that way we don't get ourselves down low right into that perfect AAA envelope where we might get shot full of holes like Swiss cheese. So let's go ahead and keep on going here. Any questions or concerns so far?
So you said up against the canopy bow, some of us don't have canopy bows.
I was going to say the Vipers. Yeah,
roughly your 10 o'clock or 2 o'clock also works.
Yeah, so roughly right about your 10 o'clock, so right here, about 45 degrees behind your nose.
Isn't there one of the canopy latches or something?
Yeah,
that's right about that position.
Yeah,
it's going to be on the Viper. It's going to be on the canopy latch, or roughly where the joystick is.
Yep.
Hey, Spud, what about calling in before you roll in that, say, for instance, I'm Tabor flight, I would say something like Tabor, flight, or Tabor 1-1 rolling in from the south with GBUs. Are we going that far?
No, so because we're dropping slick bombs, basically there's no need to call that on strike. If for whatever reason you want to, let people on the strike frequency know you're dropping weapons, then that's going to be a guided bomb. It's going to be pave way. A unguided munition is going to be just bombs away or basically bombs or pickle, things of that nature. And then, of course, for a guided air-to-ground missile, rifle, for a cruise missile, bruiser, so on and so forth. But for today, not going to be as necessary. Now, let's say you're the leader of the flight here, and you've got your flight set up in a kind of a long trail back behind you. Of course, let your flight know, hey, flight, I'm rolling in now. Leads rolling in, things of that nature. So as we get closer to our target, you can see our offsets maybe a little bit far away. The further the target here is from your canopy bow, the shallower your dive angle is going to be. So we want to be nice and tucked in right up against that target. And then I'll show you guys kind of the sight picture we want for actually starting that roll in and how we're going to execute that maneuver. So we'll go ahead and keep on going here. So I'm just going to bring myself a little bit tighter back into the target. That's looking a little bit better. Watch me totally whiff my bombs here on a demo in front of all of you guys.
Well, that's just...
There's no pressure.
That's just the Air Force did for how many years?
That's just part of it, right?
Down.
Cool. So at this point, we can see the target. We're seeing AAA coming up at us. We're getting freaked out, right? But just be patient. Patient. And we're going to wait until this target touches our canopy bow. So that way we can get that nice steep dive. So we're just going to keep going here. Keep going. Patience. Excruciating patience at this point. Everybody and their mother is shooting at me at this point. And we're going to start that roll-in maneuver now. So what are we looking for? We're looking to take... I know your Viper guys don't have a canopy bow, but basically think of a canopy bow. We're going to take this mirror in the center of our canopy bow, and I want you to roll the jet over and put the target right behind that mirror, and then pull back on the stick and get your sight, whether your CCIP cross or your LCOS here, onto that target. So it's going to look something like this. We're going to roll, center mirror, pull, roll back to wings level. And at this point, we're in a nice, very steep dive. I probably am overly steep at this point. Oh yeah, no, I'm actually pretty darn good. I'm at a pitch angle of 38 degrees, so that's perfect. And you guys can see as we...
is too steep.
Yeah, no such thing as too steep, pretty much. Maybe a 90-degree dive angle might be a little bit excessive. But at this point, because I'm so steep coming down onto the target, I'm making myself really hard to hit for those gunners down there. As well as that rolling maneuver, they were tracking me, firing up at me, trying to lead me as I'm flying in that offset. Then I make that tight turn. That's going to throw off their lead computations from their radars or their optical trackers.
Cutting out.
Okay, sorry.
I think you need to rebind your push to talk, man.
Yeah, probably. So that's going to, throw off their lead computations when you roll in on the target. And now I'm nice and steep. It's going to allow me to get those bombs off the target from a nice high altitude. And then I'm going to pull off the target from a nice high altitude as well, avoiding that sweet spot for the AAA envelope. So we'll go ahead and I'll try and get my bombs off here.
Captured.
And then as I'm pulling off the target, I'm in the gate, I'm going to roll one direction, and I'm going to roll over, and I'm going to go to the other direction. And I whiffed. That's okay. The reason why we want to roll one direction and then roll over and go the other direction is, again, to throw off any of the AAA gunners that are down there. And at this point, I just want to climb back up to altitude, the altitude I started at, which is going to be around the 18 to 20 block. And you can see we've gotten our bombs off and we're climbing back up to altitude by 13,000 feet. So we're avoiding the real deep sweet spot of the AAA here. Does that make sense to everybody? Does that kind of give a good illustration of what we want to see for those bomb drops today?
Yeah. Yep.
Beautiful. Okay. Yep. So in the interest of time, we're just going to skip over the next part here. I'm not going to do another pass. So that's basically what we're looking for. I know it's a lot, but we just want to get a nice, good roll-in maneuver, always positive Gs, steep dive angle, get the bombs off from a high altitude, and climb back up. Get away from those AAA gunners. I don't want to see you weaving and bobbing around at 1,000 feet AGL trying to avoid AAA. Get to altitude. Okay. Once we've dropped our bombs, you're then going to be flying back to your next waypoint, which at this point I think is going to be waypoint 1, 2, 3, 4, waypoint 5. So you're just going to be kind of cruising. Everything's hunky-dory. We're just cruising back to our air-to-air refueling tanker stack. At this point, there's going to be no more worrying about flying holding patterns or anything like that. We're just cruising out to the tankers. One thing that we tend to see a lot in the missions is kind of some squirrely intercept maneuvers to get with a tanker. And I'm definitely guilty of that. So for today, we just want to really concentrate on just being nice and smooth, nice and easy when it comes to rejoining on the tankers. Use your radars, use your data links, whatever you need to do to kind of predict where that tanker is going to be, where he's going to get to the end of his orbit, and then kind of predict where he's going to be coming from there. So that way you can just rejoin on him with a really good intercept really well. So utilize lead, lag, and pure pursuit to effect a nice smooth rejoin on that tanker. Then of course, for anybody who's new to flying in a mission, when you're in a flight and you are coming up to the tanker, if there's already chicks in tow at that tanker, or if you're waiting to get some fuel, you're going to hang out in what's called the observation area, which is going to be off of the left wing of the tanker, kind of in a left echelon formation to the left side of that tanker. Then the low state aircraft in your flight is going to slide over and get some gas from the boom or the two drogues that are going to be trailed by a MIPRS tanker. Then once you have enough fuel, you're then going to slide over to the reform area or the right-hand observation area. You'll hear it be called different things by different publications. But then you're just going to hang out in echelon right over here on the right-hand side of the tanker. Basically, we just want to have a sight picture of looking right down the leading or the trailing edge of the wing of our tanker for that perfect echelon right and echelon left in the observation and reform areas. Whoops. Questions, concerns about talking to the tankers, getting fuel, anything like that?
Yeah, so does this mean we're not going to rejoin prior to tanking? We're going to rejoin at tankers?
So you've got a good 100 nautical miles from the egress point off to the tanker stack. So
got it. Regress en route. Cap.
Yep. So you guys are probably going to form up. That's up to flight leads and your instructors. But basically, you're going to, make some maneuvers to allow your flight to rejoin. If you guys have done a real nice job dropping your bombs, hopefully you'll still be in that beautiful little trail position that'll allow you to get right back into your flight and then head to the tankers. You can also use the egress point here as a point to say, flight lead, you have no problem. You drop your bombs and then you come right over back here to the egress point and you just fly a little orbit here waiting for the rest of your flight. Or you decide, hey, I'm just going to head out here and I'm just going to slow it up and let everybody kind of join up. For leaders,
real quick.
Yeah,
real quick. So whenever I'm having flights come off the egress point, if we do get thumped by aggressors, do you want me to set up a bar cap?
Yeah, or if there's a flight that's being endangered by those aggressor pilots, then commit them on those aircraft.
Roger.
Spud, you want us to call crossing under to pre-contact and moving? You want us to call all our movements on the tanker?
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Another 4 flight leads, as you're flying out away from the target and you're heading back to the tanker, and you're trying to reform your flight. Kind of making a 90-degree check turn from heading to the next waypoint, and you make turn 90 degrees right or 90 degrees left, and allow the rest of your flight to fly an intercept vector on you, and then start turning back to your waypoint, is a great way to chew up space and allow your wingmen to rejoin on you pretty quickly and easily. Any other questions or concerns about reforming, getting the tankers, getting gas, any of that good stuff?
So, question I have is like with reform. So, how does the order of that work? So, I mean, if you're going from like, okay, let's say number one, let's say the guys weren't in the reform area. And so now number one, does he go over to the position that 4 is in the reform area, and then number 2 will end up in the 3 position, and like that? Do you move do you move over, or
from what I understand, if you have finished air-to-air refueling and so you're the first one, you're going to go to like the number 1 position, and then everybody's going to stack up, and then once you leave the tanker, you're then going to basically rejoin your formation into whatever the leader wants for a formation, whether that's finger 4 or combat spread or echelon, whatever it might be.
Okay, so if you're the first one, you line up in the reform area, then the next guy is going to line up to your right, the next guy is going to line up to the right of him, and so on. Got it. Okay.
Exactly. And that's easier than, say, if you're the first one to get gas, but you're the number 4 in the formation, you're like, well, how far away should I be from the tanker to be in my number 4 spot? You know, like that would be kind of difficult.
Yeah, it's easier just to stack from the tanker out and then reshuffle when you leave.
Yep. Also, we want to make sure that when we are in the tanker stack here, we have at least one member of our flight still monitoring the strike frequency in case those aggressors decide to come bounce you while they're on the tanker or something of that nature. Now, this is super easy in an aircraft where you have 2 VUHF radios, like the Hornet, because it doesn't matter what radio you put what frequency on. But for like our Viper pilots or F4 pilots, that's a little bit more difficult because you got to have, the UHF radio on the tanker frequency, and you keep your intra-flight frequency on the VHF radio. And then, you got to swap back and forth. But basically, if you're like, say, the last guy, waiting for gas because you've got the most gas in your flight, you should be the guy who's monitoring strike. And that's going to be assigned by the flight lead. And it really should be no big deal to just switch your radio back and forth between the tanker frequency and the strike frequency for when it's your turn to get gas. And then, somebody in the reform area over here is then going to swap one of their radios over to monitor the strike frequency. And then, of course, if something happens, like, oh my God, there's MiGs coming our way, then, you tell your flight lead and everybody, acts accordingly, according to what the AIC wants, basically. So that in our last mission, that was really difficult for guys, was making sure we had a member of our flight always monitoring that strike frequency. But just make sure that we're doing that for today, just in case some sort of contingency happens, as well as you'll keep apprised of what's going on with the rest of the mission and allow your leader to be kept up on everything.
And strike frequency is UHF?
Yes, it is.
Spud, can you walk me through the proper communication etiquette for when you're talking to the tanker?
Yeah, so basically, because we've got some simisms here, right? It's DCS. We essentially have, 2 separate radio systems. We have talking to each other via SRS, and we have talking to the AI via the radio menu in DCS, right? So basically, what I think works the best is you're flying to the tanker, have one member of your flight call the tanker when you're relatively close to it to say, hey, it's my intent to refuel, that first option, intent to refuel. And that's going to get the tanker swapped over into giving fuel mode, where they're going to make very shallow banks at the ends of their orbits. They're going to turn their external lights on, and they're going to get ready to receive their chicks. As soon as you're up onto the tanker, the first guy who's going to refuel is then going to slide over to whether they go for the basket on a MIPRS tanker or they go for the boom on a boom and receptacle tanker. And then that first guy, and that first guy only, is going to say, ready pre-contact and get hooked up. Then if you're on a MIPRS tanker, the second guy who's going to slide over to the next basket is going to, get ready to give the ready pre-contact, and only that guy as well. And then as soon as you're done refueling and you're over in the reform area, go ahead and cancel your air-to-air refueling options through the radio menu. The thing that really kind of makes things weird with air-to-air refueling in these big multiplayer missions is when basically we start to confuse DCS because too many people on a particular tanker are giving the intent to refuel and are giving the ready pre-contact radio calls through the DCS radio menu. And that tends to lead to a little bit of confusion. So we just want to make sure that as a flight lead, we're just making sure we're kind of guiding our wingmen to be like, hey, okay, it's your turn. You go ahead and give the intent refuel and then the ready pre-contact. Does that make sense? That we don't want too many people trying to do it all at once?
Yeah. Yep.
Cool. Because that's definitely something that kind of makes the DCS AI go a little funky.
Do we need to abort refuel when we're done? I've seen that before where that had to be done in order to make everything work.
Yes, that's exactly what he's talking about.
Yep.
Okay.
So let's say if you are topping off your tanks and you get a full load of gas, DCS World is gonna see that through its systems, and it's gonna say like, cool, everything is complete. We're done. We're disconnecting you and your radio system from that tanker. However, let's say your flight lead is like, hey, just get a squirt of gas, 2,000 pounds. That'll get us back home, no problem. And you're not going to complete that full refueling cycle. Then you have to go in and manually cancel your air-to-air refueling request with that tanker. So that way the next guy can come in and get his squirt of fuel. Does that make sense?
Copy. Yep.
Perfect.
Yeah. Hey, Spud, question real quick.
Yeah.
So do you have like a max attempt? So like say you mess up twice, you got to go knock it off and go to alternate?
We don't have that for today because today is all about, just practice for everybody. But if we're flying over blue airfields the whole way today, except for King Hussein Air College. So, and the tanker stack is right on top of Al Dumair, Marj Ruhail, Damascus International, and Meza Airfield. So if somebody's having a problem and they just can't do it, and now they're on fumes, they can just kind of drop out and go right for an airfield, basically right underneath them for today.
Copy, thanks.
Yep. For coming back to the airfield, whereas we left the airfield as single ships for the practice of joining up with our flights, coming back to the airfield, we're going to be coming back as flights, and we're going to be getting our ATC instructions as entire flights. And basically, we have a runway lineup point here that's going to be a perfect place for everyone to be at that 1,500 feet AGL and the 350 knots indicated for their upwind to the overhead. Now, we don't want to be too intent on getting to that point by the runway lineup point that we then start to disregard ATC clearances, but it's a good kind of like rule of thumb point for all of our flight leads. It's going to be runway 33 is going to be active, and it's going to be a left-hand brake. So for everybody, that's going to mean a left-hand brake is for flight leads. You're going to want to have your flight in a right echelon formation. Per the SPUD SOPs and USAF documents, we're going to be braking at the threshold, and then your wingmen are going to be dividing the rest of that runway into halves if you're a 2-ship, thirds if you're a 3-ship, quarters if you're a 4-ship, and braking accordingly down that runway. And then once you're on the downwind, you're going to dirty up your aircraft. Flights are going to receive landing clearance as a flight. You're then going to, of course, flight lead will start to turn base onto final. You'll land. If you're an F4, pop out that drag chute. If you're an F16, do that aero braking thing that's really difficult. If you're an FA18, you're just going to stop right away because F18s like to stop on the runway pretty well. Because we're landing as formations, we need to ensure that we are as safe as possible in terms of our positioning on the runway. If we are on the runway and we're rolling and we're pretty fast, maybe we landed a little bit fast, we need to scooch over and we need to take the left-hand side of the runway. If you're slowing down and you feel yourself getting to taxi speed, you need to bias over to the middle of the right-hand side of the runway. So that way, if, like, say your Dash 2 is coming in hot behind you, he has that whole left-hand side of the runway, and you can just get off easily on the right-hand side. Does that make sense?
All right. So you want to do left side hot, right side cold?
Yep, exactly.
There's more opportunities to exit left, though, but on that runway.
That is true. You are correct on that. I think just for the sake of...
Sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
No, it's fine. You can continue. I'll talk after you.
I think that just for the sake of ease for today, because most people are used to American roads where you pass on the left and go slow on the right, we'll just go with that for today.
Okay.
We may change that later on. But anyway, that's what we got for that. Yeah, go for it.
Is on takeoff and return, is it okay if comfortable, if flights were able to take off in groups of twos, or you just want to keep it one?
We're going to be taking off as single ships today. So that way everybody gets a chance to talk on the radio and talk to ground and talk to tower, basically.
Another way to split up the runway in your overhead is 3 seconds is give or take a quarter of the runway. So you just call 3 seconds and then you can give a radio click and turn. You should be spaced out appropriately.
Yep, for sure. That also works. No problem as well. Basically, we just want to make sure that we give each other adequate separation. One of the big reasons why we all need to be at that 1500
Does runway 33 have an ILS?
It does.
It does.
I don't know if we're going to be using that today, but
probably won't need it.
One of the big reasons. One of the big reasons why we want to all make sure we're at that 1500 foot AGL traffic pattern altitude for the upwind and into the break is if we're all at that altitude and we have multiple flights in the pattern at once, that's going to allow us to see each other much easier and avoid each other. So if you don't get told by ATC to delay your break, but you see you have traffic that you're going to be braking right into, you can make that executive decision, make that, airman decision of like, hey, I'm not going to brake right into this guy, so I'm going to delay my brake to the end of the runway rather than right at the threshold. Things like that. So while we need to follow ATC clearances, we also have to have those airmanship skills in our head and make the decision of like, hey, I'm not going to brake right into another flight just to follow the SOPs. Does that make sense? Beautiful.
Yeah.
Cool.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Quick question. Real quick. How do we know the position where we're spawning in the vase? I mean,
so you can look on the F10 map and then open up your knee board and see where you are, and then basically correlate that with what you're seeing on the airport diagram. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I was wondering if that was going to be available. Because for some missions, it's not.
It's going to be available for today.
All right. Thanks.
Yep. Okay. I know this is getting long, so sorry, guys. I'm trying my best here. We got a lot of info to cover. Mm-hmm. So we're stepping to our jets at 0645 local time. We're going to fly out, basically get with our flights, and then push from there over to the strike marshal point, and at which point, roughly at 0745 local time, we're then going to push the first flights, which is going to be Fangs 3 and Flume 4 are going to push. That's going to be at vol +0. Then 5 minutes after that, so that way we don't have too many flights over the top of our range, then Spectre 6 and Mako 8 are going to push at roughly 0750. 0755, Hydra 1 and Hobo 2 are going to push. at 0800, then Tabor 5 and Swifty 7 are going to push. Tabor 5 and Swifty 7 are last on the docket because you guys have the most fuel and have the most on-station time. That's why. So while we are going to be trying to hold to these timelines here, don't fall in love with it as a flight lead, because most likely we are going to have to Rolex a little bit as a result of all of the learning objectives we're trying to get in by having people taxi and take off as single ships, having everybody marshal in their flights at waypoint 1, and then push to waypoint 2, all of that good stuff. So we probably will get Rolex to the right a little bit, which is totally okay. Just make sure that you don't say push at vol plus 0 when we've been Rolex 5 minutes to the right, if that makes sense. Roughly vol plus 50, all flights are more or less going to be egressing away from the target area. This is when we were potentially going to get jumped by our friendly F5 aggressor pilots from King Hussein Air College, is when we are flying from the target area to the tankers. So just be aware of that. And then at 0920, which is a typo on the timeline there, we didn't go back in time, we're going to be basically flights arriving at the tanker stack. After that, there is no timeline. You guys are cleared to get your gas and then fly back home and make your landing accordingly. Okay, this is the part that I think tends to really confuse people and is where we get the most kind of breakdown in the flow of our missions for pilots. And that is the comms flow section. So does anybody here, I'm sure we've all been guilty of this, has anybody here not known what frequency to be on, when, and where in a DCS mission?
You're cutting out.
Okay. Has anybody here not known where to be on what frequency, when, and where in a DCS mission? I think we probably all have, right?
Yeah.
All the time.
All the time. Okay.
Every time.
Yep.
Yeah, we pretty much all got that John Travolta face going on.
Yeah. So basically, when we want to develop the airmanship skills so that way, at least when we're talking with ATC, we know exactly what frequency to be on, when, and where, basically. So if we are on the ground and starting up our aircraft, in my missions, in DCS here, your radio will always pop onto 253.0, which is going to be our ops frequency. Now, ops frequencies are used in order to allow ground crew to communicate with pilots, or admin folks to communicate with pilots in their aircraft in case there's an issue. Like, oh, we got low tire pressure. Somebody come out and fill up the tire. Or, oh, we've got some issue with the aircraft. Come out and fix it. So we're going to use that in our missions as a frequency for people to reach out for help, whether that's to the ATC folks, to me, to anybody else in the mission, or to conduct radio checks, which is also what it's used for in real life. So if you're saying having like, oh man, I can't get my INS aligned, like reach out to somebody on ops and somebody will be there to help you out, most likely.
That nose wheel feels mushy.
Yeah. And then once you're done there, you've got your jet all set up and ready to rock and roll, and you're ready to taxi. We of course need to be up on the ground frequency. So if we have a ground controller, you'll be up on ground and you'll ask for taxi clearance from the ground controller. Well, you'll go through the whole song and dance that we already talked about. You're going to taxi to the runway. Then as soon as you're holding short of the runway, you're going to switch to the tower frequency. You're going to ask for your takeoff clearance from the tower frequency. And then once you take off, you'll be swapped either to Damascus control, or you'll be shuffled right to the strike frequency. Now, sometimes ground controllers and tower controllers have time to be like, oh, hey, Spectre 6 flight, switch to tower, or Spectre 6 flight, switch to strike, or Spectre tower, switch to Damascus control. If they're inundated with activity, they may not be able to do that. So kind of use those like skills of like, okay, if I'm holding short of the runway, I should be on tower. Or if I've just taken off, I should either be on strike or Damascus control, so on and so forth. Once you are pushed to the strike frequency, that's going to be on 305.0 for Red Crown. And you're going to be on that frequency for most of the flight. You're going to switch over to the tankers and the tanker frequencies in order to get your gas. And then, of course, you're going to switch back to the strike. And then strike is going to have you switch over to Damascus control or directly to the tower for your landing clearance. Then once you're off of the runway, you're then going to get your taxi clearance via the ground controller. So it's going to be a flow from ground to tower, control, strike, back to control, tower, and ground. One thing that I think is very confusing for folks, and I think confusing for our controllers, is when we don't have enough controllers to have both a ground and tower controller, which frequency do I go to? So let's pick on somebody here again. Stick. What frequency do you come up on at an airfield that only has a tower controller?
The tower frequency?
Exactly. It sounds obvious, but it's confusing, and for good reason. Okay, so let's pick on somebody else. If you are at an airfield that is uncontrolled, there is no tower controller, what frequency do you come up on, Butter? Or not? Bueller? Butter, what frequency do you talk on when there is no active tower controller?
That's the same frequency.
Exactly, right? So a tower frequency will also be the CTAF frequency. Like 99.99% of the time, CTAF frequency and tower frequencies are the same. And then when a CTAF frequency switches over to a controlled tower frequency, that tower controller is going to be like, and Marjorie Heil Tower is open for business. This is now controlled airspace. Everybody in the airspace, say your position, or something like that. So that way he can start giving clearances as he opens the tower. Does that make sense?
CTAF is the same as approach, right?
CTAF frequency is the same as the tower frequency when there is no tower controller. So if an airfield is uncontrolled, you use the CTAF frequency, which is the Common Traffic Advisory frequency. And that's where you would be making those uncontrolled calls of like Spectre 6 is off the active runway, flying the upwind for a westbound departure, things of that nature.
Right. I was just asking, CTAF is considered the same as like an approach? Like when my local airport, when our tower closes, we go to Tampa approach. So CTAF would be the same as an approch?
No, CTAF is the same as a tower. Approach is like area regional control.
It's just like, if you ever been to a pink airport, it's just like, at everyone, I am here.
Yeah, okay, like pilot on pilot. All right, I got it.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
So CTAF is basically, it's the real name for the frequency you would use at an uncontrolled airport.
All right, gotcha. Cover that.
And at a controlled airport where there is a tower, but the tower is closed due to staffing shortages or due to the tower just being closed after hours, that same frequency becomes that pilot-to-pilot CTAF frequency. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, because at my airport, that's what they usually do. But they also give us not only that frequency, but they also give us an approach frequency because we're close to another airport.
Yep.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So when you're flying in the area around the airport, you're going to be you're into that approach controller's airspace. So
it's also if you have to leave that airport for any reason, it's essentially a frequency you hop back to. That's what that approach frequency is.
Exactly.
But if you're landing at that airport, you just go to the CTAF.
So specifically from pilots who are new to this or pilots who have become confused in the past as to what the flow of your frequencies is going to be, are there any questions, any concerns, any
You're breaking up
issues?
Yeah, cutting out again.
Damn it. Are there any concerns, any issues, or any problems with folks in terms of moving through these frequencies through the flight? Questions, issues, anything like that?
I have a weird question, if that's all right.
Go for it.
I do VATSIM sometimes, so I'm kind of familiar with this. Is Unicom and CTAF the same exact thing? I've never really understood that.
So they're
sort of, not
usually
really.
two frequencies. So Unicom is like our ops frequency here. That's the frequency you would use.
Okay.
Like say you landed at an airport and you're taxiing to an FBO and you want to contact that FBO, as you're taxiing in, so that way they have the gas truck ready. You would do that on Unicom, which is usually, what is it, like 122.75 or something like that?
122.8.
There you go.
I fly VATSIM. I can answer this for you. Essentially, CTAF, in the sense of VATSIM, is uncontrolled airport. It's usually, if there's not one provided on an approach plate or something, or on a like airport info plate, it'll be just the tower frequency. And Unicom is more like uncontrolled airspace away from an airport. Right?
Okay.
So if you're flying into what would normally be like what would it be? Oakland Center. If you're flying into that airspace, but Oakland Center isn't online, you stay on Unicom, right?
It's unrelated to
that's
DCS.
VATSIM, but
okay. So that's not the way it works in real life. Just to be clear.
No.
It's
not. That is
okay.
VATSIM.
Okay.
I'm always on 122.8.
Okay. Well, with that last confusing note, are there any questions about this here, and or how it would work in real life? Bueller?
Yeah, so I've just taken off. I'm climbing out. Should I be expecting a final handoff from tower, or should I just preemptively push to control or departure?
So if we have controlled airspace, ideally, and you don't know, okay, do we have Damascus control or not? Ideally, tower would be like, okay, climb, clear for takeoff, runway 33, climb 5,000 on runway heading, switch to strike, or switch tactical, or switch to Damascus control on 177.55. Ideally, they're going to tell you where to go, but if not, we have two frequencies where we can check in and be like, hey, anybody home? And then if nobody's home, then switch to the other frequency, right? And that's kind of getting into that airmanship skills of like, oh, geez, I don't know where to go. Okay, let's just try one of them and not be afraid to get yelled at or something, if that makes sense. So basically, ideally, you'll be handed off. If not, ask for a handoff. And if they're still too busy, just switch over yourself. And that's kind of getting into that kind of like airmanship skills of having the confidence to just swap over yourself if you're not getting what you need. Does that make sense?
Yep, thanks.
Perfect. Just some basically examples of what you're going to see in your knee boards. We've kind of gone over this a little bit. I'm sure you guys have looked up at this stuff before. Kind of another overview of that holding pattern diagram for Marshall. That 090 inbound, so you're going to fly, you're going to hit waypoint 2, you're going to make that left-hand turn to 270 degrees, fly for 30 nautical miles, make another left-hand turn, hopefully it's 090 degrees. If the wind isn't too bad, you're going to fly direct back to waypoint 2, hit the waypoint, and just keep on going until your push time. It's going to be a left-hand wagon wheel at waypoint 1, and then the actual holding pattern at waypoint 2, and push to target as assigned. Arrival procedures will either be assigned via Damascus control. If we don't have that, the tower controller will assign your arrival procedure, and then Damascus control will either assign you the approach procedure, or Ramat David Tower will. Usually we're going to expect today for a visual for a straight in or an overhead pattern landing. Air threats. Because the Piranhas are giant assholes, they are probably going to want to mess with our exercise today in any way that they can. Red air threats are the usual slew of Piranha Air Force aircraft, so MiG 21s through 29s and Mirage F1s. We've got their RWR code and their threat code here. We've also got the usual slew of Soviet-style SAM systems. So make sure that you do not cross the border into Pirani airspace, or you may get engaged by these SAM sites. Otherwise, nobody should shoot real bullets at you today. Today is a training mission. But if you do wander into the wrong piece of airspace, you might get shot at.
Quick question.
Go for it.
So if we have those F5s or whatever from King Hussein, do you want us to actually have them kill the F5s, or is that is it going to be sim or okay?
You're going to kill the F5s because we can't really sim a sim, you know.
Cool. Works for me.
And that kind of brings us to the end here, guys. I know that was a marathon of info. I know that, but I think that it's all going to help you guys out. I seem to, at least from my perspective, it seemed like you guys were engaged with it, and at least having a little fun laughing at me and laughing at each other here. So, with that, guys, I think we'll move on to flying in the mission. Any other last minute questions or concerns?